Good morning. My name is Mel Hartley and I'm the Senior Communications and Regulation Officer here at the Training Accreditation Council, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on Managing and Amending RTO Scope. At this time, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, the Whadjuk people. We wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and this region. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Russell Docking, who is our presenter for today. Thank you very much, Russell.
Thank you very much, Mel, and welcome everybody to our session. It's good to see so many of you with us today. And Mel, thank you very much for setting this up and running things so smoothly as you always do. Today we're looking at managing and amending your RTO scope. This is a short session. We're running for an hour, so we won't be taking a break within that time. But there are some documents that you can access, hopefully through your web, that we'll be sharing or referencing from time to time as we go through this morning. First, of course, there is a document that is the summary of the PowerPoint slides that we're using. Secondly, there's an amendment to registration guide developed by TAC, and we'll be talking about that with you. There's also, as we'll point out to you, a lot of information on TAC's website. And thirdly, there is a TAC fact sheet relating to transition and teach out, which is part of the requirements when a unit is superseded or deleted. And we'll be coming to those in a short while. Our topics for today are designed to guide you through the process. So first of all, we talk about managing your scope, and we'll draw the distinction here between superseded and deleted training products. Where training products are superseded or deleted, you don't have a choice. You have to take some form of action. So it's not, if you like, not voluntary. Mapping superseded training products, we'll discuss the concept of equivalence, because in some cases superseded training products are judged to be equivalent, and some cases they're not deemed to be equivalent, and we need to talk about the implications of that. Then we move to voluntary amendments to scope, and we'll be talking about the points at which you decide to either add to your scope or remove training products from your scope. And in relation to that, we'll be looking at considerations that you need to think about before applying for additional scope. Then we move to the actual process through which you would need to pass in order to amend your scope. So how to lodge an amendment application, the sort of evidence required to support an application for amendment to scope, and in particular we'll be referring to particular clauses in the standards for RTOs, and then common challenges in amending scope. And at that point we'll refer to the experience of applicants and our observations as TAC about the sort of challenges that people have when they're going through the scope amendment process. I need to draw your attention to the fact that there is on the TAC website an enormous amount of information. Indeed, apart from this webinar, you'll find very comprehensive information, or I should say in addition to this webinar, you'll find very comprehensive information on the TAC website. You can see that there's a link on the screen. You'll find also the link in the handout for the PowerPoint slides, and again the link will be provided at a later slide near the end of our session this morning. But of course, if you go to the TAC website, you can find the item that is circled there, which talks about changes to registration, and that leads you on into some very, very useful information, much of which we're sharing with you today through this session. When we come to look at managing scope, there are a number of clauses in the standards that we need to be conscious of when we go through the process. And as I said before, scope can be changed through either training products such as qualifications or units of competency, which are superseded. Sometimes they are deleted. That means that they are removed entirely from the set of nationally recognised training products. So they effectively cease to exist. And clauses 1.26 and 1.27 talk about teach-out requirements. So let's have a look at these clauses a bit more closely. When a unit of competency or a qualification or a skill set is superseded, you have 1 year for your current students to complete, or for you to transfer your current students across to the new version of the training product if they're still undertaking the training. So you have 1 year to make sure that that the students have closed off on the qualification, skill set, or unit of competency, or else you need to transfer them across to the new version of the unit. When a unit is deleted, there's no concept of transfer here because there's nothing to be transferred to. There's nothing that's superseded the unit. It simply ceases to exist. So you're given 2 years to complete the qualification or accredited course, after which you can no longer deliver that course or unit of competency. But if it's just a unit of competency or a skill set or a short course, you have 1 year to complete. So the 2 years is for extended qualifications or accredited course. But if it's just one unit or a short skill set or a short course or module, then you have 1 year to complete, after which no more delivery can be made. In either case of the superseded or the deleted, clause 126D says you can't commence more new training with students on old training products from the time that the unit is superseded or deleted. So fundamentally, you have time to teach out, but you do not have time to start new students on old superseded or deleted training products. As soon as they're superseded or deleted, and you can see that on the training.gov website, you can see that nobody can start with those qualifications, skill sets, or units or short courses. However, there is a little variation on that, because sometimes a superseded unit continues to be named as a core or specified elective in a training package's qualification requirements. When that happens, then 126A does not apply, and you can continue to teach that course, that unit of competency, until that ceases to be part of that qualification. So when that qualification is changed or superseded, we would not find that the superseded unit in it any longer, and at that point you would not be able to continue teaching that superseded unit. So you can see that there are a few little complications in here. This is also explained, of course, through the standards themselves and through the guide that's available through TAC for the standards, and also on TAC's website. When a unit is superseded, as distinct from deleted, there comes into existence a new unit of competency which covers more or less the same territory. That is why it's called superseded. If there was no new unit covering similar territory, then the unit would be seen to be and reported as deleted. So the new unit of competency can be judged to be equivalent or not equivalent. If the unit is judged to be equivalent, and you have to look at the unit of competency, and you can see this on training.gov because it reports about previous versions of the units, you can see whether or not it is judged and determined to be equivalent. And it is determined to be equivalent because fundamentally the new unit of competency, the one that supersedes the old unit of competency, provides fundamentally the same outcomes. It'll be different in various ways, but fundamentally it serves the same purpose and achieves the same outcomes as its predecessor. And under those circumstances, it's judged to be equivalent. And what happens there is that TAC automatically updates your scope. So you do not have to make an application when the superseding unit is equivalent. The superseding unit is automatically added to your scope. The teach-out rules apply the same, but fundamentally you do not have to make an application to achieve that on your scope. I might say as an aside that even though it's stated to be equivalent, it does not necessarily mean it's the same. So although TAC might automatically update your scope, it does not mean that your training materials and assessment tools have automatically been updated. You will still need to very carefully map what the differences are and make sure that any differences are reflected in your training materials, your assessment tools and your delivery materials, because equivalent means the same outcome, but it doesn't mean the same content necessarily, and under those circumstances you need to adjust. So TAC will automatically update your scope, but it does not mean that your old resources automatically apply to the new version of the unit of competency. But in some cases, the new unit of competency that supersedes the old is significantly different. That means it has different outcomes, and it may well be because there have been shifts or changes within industry. That means that the unit has to be updated, and given that the outcomes will be different, it'll be judged to be non-equivalent. That means that there's a significant change, and you will then have to apply to have the new version of the training product on scope, because it might involve new equipment, some significant changes to your training and assessment resources and the like. So if it is judged to be non-equivalent, you will need to go through the process of applying to have the new unit of competency on scope. So where there is a change, you need to check to see if it's equivalent or non-equivalent, because that will impact on what you need to do. Okay, let's focus a bit more now on the voluntary changes. Clearly, where a unit is seeded or deleted, you don't have a choice. You must, under those circumstances, either modify always your training and assessment materials, but also look to see whether or not you need to have the new unit of competency on scope by going through an application process. But in many cases, over choices that you make. That is, for a start, you might remove things from scope, and you might move things from scope because, for example, there's been a loss of resources. You might find that you no longer have a trainer that can deliver the appropriate unit of competency or qualification. You might find that there is a shift in the needs of the community in terms of the training, so that you might find that there's a loss of market, or you might find that there are other reasons why particular qualifications or units of competency are surplus to requirements, and you're going to just tidy up or clean up your scope. So there are lots of reasons why you might remove things from scope. Alternatively, you might want to add things to scope. So you might say, well, we've got a new industry opportunity. Maybe there is new industry developments in your region, and you want to take advantage of those and support those through the delivery of training. That means, in effect, that there's a new learner market, and you want to be able to not so much exploit, but provide a service to that new learner market by expanding your scope of operations. You might discover that there are new resources that you didn't have available to you before, but which are now become available. And there might be government initiatives that are encouraging a particular process that encourage you to develop training opportunities within that area. So when we look at voluntary changes, we can see that there is for removal of scope and for addition to scope. Let's have a look at those in a little bit more detail. Before you apply to remove scope, you need to consider certain issues, particularly the impact on current students. And you need to think about the impact on your apprentices and trainees who may be partly on their way through, and how you are going to cope with the fact that you are no longer delivering training to service their training needs and meet your training obligations. And you also need to think about teach-out rules in terms of how those are going to impact on current students. You also maybe should think a little bit about alternative strategies to cope with change, because quite often these changes can be very disruptive to your current students. So can you meet the needs of those students through other arrangements, such as partnership arrangements with third parties? So you might be able to find that you can continue on the process of serving the needs of those students through extending your range and reach through third-party arrangements, or you might be able to find alternative delivery modes, perhaps the use of online or hybrid systems of delivery, or workplace-based delivery, other sorts of strategies that might enable you to hold on to that scope, certainly in terms of lessening the impact on current students. So you do need to think before you remove scope. You need to consider how that is going to impact on your students, particularly your current students, and what sort of things can you do in order to help you cope with that particular challenge. When you're adding to scope, there are quite a number of things that you need to consider. And this image here indicates a sort of range of things that you need to address. First of all, you need to be confident that there is a market for that increased scope. You don't want to put your RTO in peril by overreach, if you like, beyond what market is available to you. So the first thing you need to think about is there really a market? Is there really a need for this? You need to think about the financial implications. Adding to your scope may involve purchasing equipment, providing new facilities, employing additional staff. There are a whole range of financial implications. And again, in view of the market and its potential, you need to ask yourself the question, is this going to be financially viable? Part of that financial cost is staffing, but it's not just a financial issue. It's a question of whether the staff are available. So that you need to ask yourself, particularly if you're in a regional area, where are you going to find the staff who have the necessary credentials to be able to deliver this, meet the requirements of this increase in scope? Of course, when it comes to staffing requirements, if there is an increase in scope that requires auditing, that will basically mean that the TAC will be checking to see that you have staff, appropriate staff under standards 113, 114, 115 and 116 to service the needs. Otherwise, the scope cannot happen. Then the fourth thing, of course, you need to think about are training and assessment resources. Again, this is part of the financial implications because you might be looking here at equipment and facilities. You might need to make arrangements for training and assessment to happen in workplaces, such as where work placement is necessary. And so you will need to consider those sorts of things. And facilities and equipment is emphasized in item 5. And that can be quite a considerable cost, but you may in fact look at hiring facilities and hiring equipment. You may not have to make an upfront financial commitment to those things, but you need to know that those resources are available so that you can deliver. Then, of course, you need to consider the fact that you are going to be dealing with perhaps a different cohort of students, perhaps with a different set of client needs and support needs. Certainly, you're going to have more students, which means you need to look at the way in which you support your clients and meet their needs so that you can expand your operations or access to those resources to meet the increased size in scope and in terms of the cohort of students. And finally, you may need to ask yourself the question, do I need to form third-party arrangements? And it may be that there are third-party arrangements needed in order to extend your reach, to access facilities and equipment, to access industry expertise. Lots of reasons why you might need to look at third-party arrangements. Now, these are not new considerations. These are the considerations through which you will have gone when you set yourself up as an RTO, or if you're involved with a TAFE, these are considerations that you would need to go through in order to make a case for your organisation to expand your scope. So these are not new, but this is just a reminder of the sort of things that you need to consider before you embark on the process of extending your scope. There are, of course, costs involved in amending your scope, and so that there are a number of fees that are charged because from a tax point of view, there is auditing and other processes needed in order to monitor the way in which scope is managed. And so there's a fee structure which provides $920 for adding a qualification, plus a further $135 for each additional qualification over the first. For the first 7 units of competency you're adding, there is $240 per unit. And for each additional unit beyond the 7, it's a charge of $135 per unit. And then transition to equivalent accredited courses, the fee is $240 for one application, but that includes any number of courses. And that's fundamentally because the transition to equivalent accredited courses is largely an administrative function. So you can see that quite apart from the previous slide when we talked about all of the kinds of planning considerations you need to go through, of course there is always the issue of cost because there is a process, a significantly managed process from the regulator's point of view. There are also fees that you need to consider prior to taking on board the task of amending your scope. That really deals with the sort of questions that you might need to consider before you launch into the scope extension process and registering an extension to your scope. But what we have now is a short 5-minute clip on submitting an RTO amendment to registration application. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you've had a chance to take that clip on board. I might say that the clip is also available through the TAC website. So if you want to revisit the clip, you can do so through the TAC website. But I might also say, once again, that the information that we're going to share with you now is part of the Amendment to Registration Application Guide. So you have the paper, black and white paper version of the process for amendment. You have the website and you have the clip. So hopefully, along with this webinar, you'll have enough information to feel comfortable about working through the process of amending scope. So let's have a look at the sort of things that we're going to address now. The first is that you need, like any kind of application for relating to your scope and the provision of your training services, you need to provide evidence. The evidence that, first of all, you're going to need to provide relate to the standards. And so we'll look firstly at the criteria from the standards that apply to you. And there are a set of criteria which always apply, and some criteria that will apply in certain circumstances. Then you need to gather evidence, and it needs to be in a digital form because you need to be able to convey that information digitally to TAC and, if necessary, onto an auditor to demonstrate compliance with these criteria. And you need to provide a mapping of criteria and evidence to assist an auditor to verify compliance. And so the Amendment Registration Application Guide provides more information, but we're going to share with you some of that now. First of all, we need to reflect on what clauses within the standards apply. And so there are certain mandatory clauses, and this should come as no surprise that they relate primarily to Standard 1, but also in part to Standard 5. So Standard 5 is basically talking about how you're going to inform prospective and current students about the services that you are now proposing to offer. And so under 5.1 and 5.3, we would expect to see some brochure or a draft of a web page or some other way in which you're going to communicate to students about the course. In terms of 5.1, about the course's outcomes and how those outcomes could serve the needs of potential learners. And under 5.3, we would expect to see for this new course or this new unit of competency, whatever you're extending, what implications this has in terms of your responsibilities as an RTO and what responsibilities there are for a student. And under 5.3, also we would need to see what fee implications there were, so what costs implications there were for the student. So 5.1 and 5.3 reflect on what a student needs to know in terms of the nature and purpose of the course and its outcomes, and also what costs might be involved. When we look at Standard 1, we can see that there are quite obvious requirements. The first, Standard 1.1, is what are the training and assessment strategy implications, and that also includes, of course, the amount of training, which is also picked up under Standard 1.2. So we would need to see that you had considered, if it was a qualification, what was the amount of training and what were the combination of elective and core units of competency you're offering. If it was a skill set or a unit of competency, we would want to see what sort of training and assessment strategies you had in mind to enable learners to achieve their outcomes, and what sort of amount of training was involved in that. Under Standard 1.3, we would need to see how you'd gathered together the resources that were sufficient to be able to support the services that you are now proposing to offer. So we would want to be able to see, for example, that you had necessary staff, although we're going to pick that up under 1.13, 14 and 16. But would also want to be able to see that you had the necessary student support services to deal with perhaps a different cohort of students and certainly different numbers of students. And we would want to be able to see that you had the training and assessment training, delivery and assessment materials and resources, including, of course, facilities and equipment. So like any circumstance where you are about to offer training, we would need to see that you were prepared with sufficient resources to be able to do that. We'd want to be able to see under standard 1.5 and 1.6 that you had consulted with industry and to make sure that what you were planning to deliver reflected industry's needs, but both in terms of the content of the course materials and, of course, in terms of the content of assessment materials, and also the modes and processes for delivery, the strategies for delivery. And under 1.6, we would want to see how you're going to make sure that that industry engagement that was being used to make sure these materials were relevant also impacted on the current industry skills of the personnel that you are proposing to employ for the purposes of delivery of the course. Under standard 1.7, we would need to see specific information about the support services that you are offering to this cohort of students, because it may be that there are different kinds of support services you need to provide. Under standard 1.8, we would want to be able to see the specific assessment strategies that you have in place for new units of competency, or revised units of superseded units of competency, or the superseding units of competency, or new qualifications that you wanted to add to scope. So we'd need to be able to see that there were comprehensive assessment resources. And under 1.9, we will need to see how you had incorporated this new scope into your plan for assessment validation. Under 113 and 114 and 116, we would need to know that you had the necessary staff to hand to be able to deliver and assess. So under standard 113, we'd need to be able to see that they had the necessary vocational competencies or equivalent. We would need to be able to see they had the current industry skills, and they needed to be able to had current vet knowledge and skills. And under 114, we would need to be able to see that the persons that you were going to engage to deliver and assess had the necessary TAE qualifications. And finally, under standard 1, we would want to see that you have plans for and evidence of the professional development activities of those individuals. So mandatory clauses basically are asking the question, are you ready to deliver, and do you have all the resources necessary to deliver, including information that you would provide to students ahead of time that are covered in standard 5.1 and 5.3. There also were applicable clauses. In other words, if you are going to be employing somebody who does not necessarily have all of the qualifications, the TAE qualifications necessary to deliver, and you're going to be having supervision arrangements, we would need to see clauses 117 to 120. If you're only going to be delivering through assessment and not actually delivering training itself, we would need to see that you had a person with assessor qualifications under standard 115. If your proposal is to extend your scope into the world of TAE training, then clauses 122 to 125 would now apply. If you are going to be using third-party providers, then clauses 2.3 and 2.4 would apply. If you're going to be charging fees over $1,500, we would need to see how you are going to protect those prepaid fees through standard 7.3. And if your cohort was now going to involve delivery to children, individuals under 18 years of age, we would need to be able to see under clause 8.5 that you had working with children police clearances for the personnel involved with the training. So you can see that there are mandatory clauses which every application, which will apply to every application, and you will find that there are some clauses which are selected by TAC in response to your application in order to make sure that all relevant aspects of the standards are addressed and for which you need to provide evidence. The evidence you provide will take a number of different forms. And again, this is not unlike the sort of process that you would have gone through for your original registration or re-registration. So we would expect to see documents such as policies and procedures, assessment tools, assessment strategies, delivery materials, more or less all of the kind of documentation. I did mention before too, brochures or handouts or flyers in relation to the information that is available to prospective students before they commence. So there'll be text information mostly in the form of documents, but we would of course need that information to be available digitally so that can be reviewed by an auditor. There would be photographs, and the photographs may well be of facilities and equipment. Those sort of photographs would enable us to see that you have gathered together the necessary resources. And there may well be also site visits and interviews. Site visits and interviews basically involve an auditor coming out to meet with you, to view the facilities and equipment, and to discuss with you your strategies for training and assessment delivery, with, of course, the documentation you've already provided as a background. So there are lots of forms of evidence. I failed to mention that photographs, of course, could also include videos, so that you might provide a video of a walk around the facilities, or you might need to provide a video of equipment in operation. Those sorts of things, whatever you can provide, which helps the auditor and the Training Accreditation Council to understand your level of preparedness. TAC needs to make a decision, though, based on a risk assessment as to whether or not an audit is needed at all. And it's already been mentioned that in the case of an equivalent unit, no audit is needed. And under those circumstances, the process of making an amendment to scope is done as an administrative task without audit at all. Then there's a desk audit, where the auditor conducts an audit at their desk, focusing primarily on documentation you've provided and photographs and the like. That doesn't mean that the auditor might not ring you up to have a talk about some issues. It might well be that the auditor observes or notices something that needs clarification, and under those circumstances the desk audit might include a conversation over the phone, or even an exchange of emails in order to gather additional information. And then, of course, the third level is site visit, where an auditor will pay a personal visit to your delivery site to look, as I said before, and to observe equipment and the training facilities, to interview you and to discuss issues identified through the desk audit that preceded it. So the process will depend on a risk assessment, and it's about you as an RTO being a risky RTO. It's more likely to be about the issues associated with the actual training itself. So some areas of training are high risk, and indeed we have these things called high risk work licenses. So under those circumstances, a site visit is going to be inevitable because of the level of risk, not of you as an RTO, but of the level of the risk of the training itself and its implications for industry. So there are a number of aspects of risk assessment that enables TAC to make a decision as to whether or not an audit is needed, whether it needs to be only a desk audit, or whether it needs a formal site visit. All of this information can be found through the website that I referred to before. I again encourage you to look at that website. As I said before, it does also provide a link to the little video clip that we used before, and it also provides a step-by-step, very comprehensive information about the process through which you need to go. But acknowledging that this information is available and with all of the support, it is there for you because it reflects the fact that there are challenges in the process of amending scope. And just want to share with you some of the, because this is a sort of an expression of concern in terms of your applications, but rather is saying these are things that you need to focus on in order to make sure that you're okay. And the primary one is assessment. Although we did find in the past that assessment was a problem with about 36% of applications, it's now down to about 15%. So assessment is becoming less and less of an issue. And indeed, in the past, applications level of non-compliance in applications was quite high. And now the level of non-compliance is only about 17%. In other words, 83% of applications were compliant in the last 12 months. And so what we are seeing is still a number of significant non-compliances, but the number of non-compliances and the occurrence of non-compliances is diminishing, and that's very encouraging. It may well be very much due to the fact that we have this education program, but I would also put it down to a great deal to the work that TAC has done in building its resources in terms of the information provided on the website. So assessment is a big issue right across the board, but also within the context of amending scope. So something to which you need to give attention. And I might remind you, of course, that assessment includes RPL. And there are still some uncertainties about amongst RTOs as to what the requirements of RPL are. The second is sufficient resources. People often go out on a limb and seek to extend scope without necessarily considering access to the necessary resources. One of the resources, of course, is assessment tools. And so part of the reason why sufficient resources is a significant area of non-compliance may well be in part because of challenges within the development of assessment resources. But other resources such as appropriate equipment and training facilities and for that matter staff are all a cause of concern and have been a cause of non-compliance within applications in the past. And the final thing is that amount of training and the calculation, if you like, and the understanding of the amount of training that's going to be involved in the new product has been a problem. In the past, it accounted for around about 25% of the non-compliances. That has dropped very significantly down to just about 11% of the non-compliances. So once again, we're seeing a very significant shift from being a troubling level of non-compliance to a worrying and concerning level of non-compliance, but it's certainly a great trend to see that in each of these three areas, the level of and the occurrence of non-compliances is steadily diminishing, and one would hope to find that continues over time. But this is just a heads up for you, saying these are the sort of things that you might need to consider very closely in terms of amending scope. So these are the main challenges within the context. I might say that, of course, one of the support mechanisms is a very comprehensive set of webinars and chats and other resources available, particularly the fact sheets, which are mentioned on this slide, to assist you with effectively all aspects of your process of extending your scope of registration. So, of course, the standards for RTOs, but they can be a little obtuse at times. So the TAC User's Guide for the standards is there to help you to interpret specific requirements. There's a third-party arrangements fact sheet, which will assist you if you are going to be utilising third-party arrangements to extend your scope. There's an amount of training fact sheet, which, as I mentioned before, was an area of concern. So the amount of training fact sheet should help you with the determination of an appropriate amount of training. Transition and teach out fact sheet, which talks about the process of, particularly where a unit is superseded or deleted, what actions you need to take. An industry engagement fact sheet, which is really important because if you are extending scope into new industry areas, then you need to make sure you are fully engaged with those industries so that you can reflect that engagement and those understandings in your training, delivery and assessment materials. Your assessment fact sheet and assessment validation fact sheet, a lot of guidance available there. Developing training and assessment strategies fact sheet, which picks up on, in part, on the amount of training, but of course, very particularly in terms of training approaches and assessment strategies in general and how they connect across to your delivery plans of those services. Vocational competence and industry currency fact sheet, which picks up particularly on making sure that you have access to the expertise to deliver through appropriate trainers and assessors, and then identifying and meeting learner needs fact sheet. And that may be particularly important because you may be moving across to deal with a different cohort of students. And that different cohort of students may be less familiar to you than those with whom you've dealt with in the past. So your extension to scope may take you into new territory. It may take you into new territory of students, cohort of students. It may take you into a new industry territory. It may take you into new territory in terms of your delivery strategies and modes. It may take you into new territory in relation to your assessment materials and assessment strategies. So all of that does mean that when you launch out into extending your scope, you need all the help you can get, and the great deal of help, as I said before, is available through the TAC website and through the resources that you see on the screen now. And of course, hopefully today's presentation will also help with you, help you with the process. If you have further questions, please feel free to contact TAC. There is on the left-hand box there a number of ways you can contact TAC, and TAC is very happy to respond to questions that you might have. TAC's philosophy, if I may say, is one of collegial support. Rather than being a policeman on the beat, TAC is there to support you through the process. So please feel free to ask questions as you go. Also to follow TAC resources, including webinars and fact sheets and the like, which are accessible through the TAC website. And to help us with our work in delivering training and guidance through webinars, we ask that you consider providing feedback through the feedback survey, which can be accessed either through the information that is provided through the chat box from Mel, or through the scanning the QR code. I forgot what it was called for a moment, on the screen now. So there we are, folks. That finishes up our session for today. Thank you very, very much for participating. Really good to have you with us, and I hope all goes well when you start considering your processes of changing your scope. All the best, and thank you very much for participating, and thank you, Mel, for managing it so beautifully again. Goodbye now.